talking to somebody the other day who was over in Spain. Roads are great here, they said. I said, yeah, we paid for them. We gave a load of money to the EU so that Spain could have good roads. But our roads are crap. What's going on? Annabel Denham's here. Let's see if we can get some sense back on the show. Annabel, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I'm afraid I've sort of gone off on one a bit this morning because I've discovered that basically nobody knows what they're doing in this country. There's a guy called Jimmy Breslin who once wrote a book in America. He was a great American newspaper columnist, and he wrote a book about the Mets, the baseball team, who were the most useless baseball team of all time. They were a New York team. And he just wrote, the title of the book was, "Can Anybody Here Play This Game?" And I find myself kind of regurgitating that about this government. They don't seem to know what they're doing. And on top of all of that, on top of the money we're giving away to places like Kuala Lumpur to fix their traffic problems, I find out that we're now housing Radovan Karadzic in one of our prisons. I didn't know that.
No, we do seem to be lurching from one outrage to the next, don't we, Mike? You know, I think that in the case of the Bosnian war criminal, the butcher of Bosnia, I think that, you know, it's connected to this rather nebulous term, human rights, and, you know, what sort of treatment people are owed beyond having access to food and water and shelter, you know, and those sorts of things. And of course, just in the British lexicon, when it comes to what the sorts of things that unions, for instance, are pushing for, and lawyers and human rights activists, I think it's just expanding so much. But no, in this case, he's trying to sue for, I think, £50,000. And who would pay, Mike? Well, of course, it would be the British taxpayer, wouldn't it? Who always seems to be the ones who are...
But I don't understand why we've got it. Why are we housing him here? You know, apparently Dominic Raab announced it back in 2021 that it was part of a deal we'd done with the UN. But, you know, he committed his crimes in a foreign country. He was found guilty in a foreign country. What the hell's he doing on the Isle of Wight?
Well, and one suspects that he'd be getting far worse treatment were he in a prison, perhaps in other parts of the world, than he would on the Isle of Wight, where I expect that treatment, relatively speaking, is quite good. Now, I don't know the intricacies of the arrangement that we had with the UN, but certainly I think a lot of people will be quite cross to hear that they are the ones paying to...
Absolutely.
Up in, you know, in prison accommodation, especially when our prison estate is in a dire condition, overcrowded, of course, so it's such that we have an early release scheme being put into place, but also many of them not actually fit for purpose, understaffed and condition and so on and so forth. So, you know, we oughtn't to be housing any more prisoners than is absolutely necessary. But to your earlier question, you know, does anybody know what they're doing? I have my doubts. You know, for a long time we wondered whether Starmer was a socialist and that he would be pursuing a very left-wing agenda, but perhaps would be pulled slightly to the centre by the demands of the electorate, or indeed some within his own party. But I'm increasingly thinking that they're just rudderless, they're moreless, they don't really have guiding philosophy and ideology that they're trying to pursue. And when it comes to their economic agenda, it's completely incoherent to say that we've got a massive black hole that must be filled with higher taxes, whilst also offering enormous pay increases to public sector workers. And there are so many inconsistencies like this. Labour are promising that they're going to go for growth, but they want to increase union power and they want more regulation. As I say, they want higher taxes on individuals and businesses too, want to increasingly seize the productive side of our economy in order to pour money into public sector, which is so bloated now already. So they don't seem to have any of the solutions to the major problems facing this country.
They really don't. And I mean, there's a great piece in your paper yesterday, or day before, I think, in the Telegraph, by Nick Timothy, former aide to Theresa May in Downing Street, now MP, who basically said this Labour government is mean, dishonest and downright dangerous. I think I agree with him, and I think a lot of people are coming to that conclusion as well.
Well, certainly he's got a point when it comes to the dishonesty. And Nick also wrote a piece for us a few weeks ago saying that Labour were telling the biggest lie in British politics, which is that the previous administration had left an even worse mess than they could possibly have conceived of, when, of course, they already had access to the books. The IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, was warning before the general election that there was a roughly £20 billion black hole. None of it would have come to the Labour government, but they were just trying to lay the groundwork for tax rises in the autumn budget, which Rachel Reeves has subsequently admitted she's intending to do. No, this is all about redistribution. This is about taking from some sectors or sections of our society, sectors of our economy, in order to give to others. But it simply won't be sustainable, you know, unless we do get growth. Now, we have had two consecutive quarters of growth, 0.7% GDP growth growth in the first quarter and 0.6 in the second. Our economy is somewhat miraculously managing to grow. But Labour are putting that in jeopardy, and that is very dangerous.
But I also wonder whether, I don't know, you'll know better than me what the measures of growth are, but I wonder whether the growth that is being measured is simply purely down to the fact that government spending is up, and that we're borrowing even more money. I mean, the borrowing figures are out today. Difference between public sector spending and income: £3.1 billion in July, £1.8 billion more than July of last year. So we're spending an awful lot of money from the central core, but it's money we haven't got.
Well, no, certainly that's true. And, there are already rumours that Rachel Reeves might adjust the fiscal rules in order that Labour can borrow more, because you have to wonder how on earth they're going to fund their spending plans. Purely through taxation. When we are at or close to our taxable limit now, tax burden set to hit 70-year highs, that people are just being squeezed like they haven't been in decades. Businesses, of course, and how sustainable is that really? But I think when it comes to it's the structural and the cyclical sides of our economy, and cyclical indicators are all reasonably promising. We've got inflation back down to or close to the Bank of England's target. We've got GDP going up, but we've got major structural problems with our economy. We've got stagnant productivity. We've got this bloated public sector that just keeps growing, where productivity again is very low. So we've got major problems that growth can perhaps mask to a great degree, but ultimately need to be fixed. And Labour's solution to fixing the fact that the public sector is failing to perform and people's experiences of it are generally quite negative is just to increase the pay of public sector workers. Well, that simply isn't going to solve the problem.
No, and it's a never-ending sort of round, isn't it? It's like, in one door, out the other. Who was it on Tuesday? I think it was Mick Lynch and the RMT. Today we've got the Rail Union, the Transport and Salaried Staffs Association, TSSA, who are people who I think don't drive trains, don't actually go on trains, but sort of sit around and organise for trains to go somewhere. They're calling for 38 days off a year, and in the wake of the 14% increase given to train drivers ASLEF last week, they're basically calling for a 35-hour week and more money. And it's never going to stop, is it? I mean, everybody who is anybody in the public sector is now queuing up with the begging bowl out.
Well, of course they are. They're looking at the other deals that have been negotiated by other unions and thinking that they want that for themselves. And, members were putting, I imagine, some pressure on union leaders to go back to the relevant department and demand that they have a better arrangement. What's interesting today is how businesses are warning about the negative consequences of some aspects of the New Deal for workers that Angela Rayner is putting forward. She said it would be legislation within 100 days of the Labour government, and they want to boost workers' rights. They want to have more union representation within companies, and actually you've now got business leaders saying that there's a risk that a small number of workers would be able to hold these companies to ransom, and that will have an impact on things like business investment. And of course it will, because ultimately these unions are not interested in the bottom line so much as they are getting the best pay and working deals for their members, regardless of what the cost might be to the business, and regardless of the impact that it might have on the operation of those businesses. We had these warnings before the election, but they do seem to just be falling on deaf ears, and you have to wonder how much worse are things going to get before. Well, we said it, didn't we? Double down, or
we said it. Last time I saw you, we were talking about how how bad is it going to get under Labour, because we all knew Labour were coming in, and we all sort of said, well, it can't be much worse than it is now. Well, I'm sorry, it turns out it can be a lot worse. And even this week, the latest badness coming out of Downing Street was Keir Starmer saying, oh, by the way, I'm going to be pushing for more people to work from home because I think it makes them more productive. I mean, unbelievable. Piece of the Times today saying that nearly half of us are still doing work while on holiday, which is not so much about doing work while you're on holiday, but it's basically doing work while you're abroad, going on holiday and pretending that you're actually still working.
Well, I think that Keir's warnings about a culture of presenteeism don't really seem to be rooted in evidence. In fact, the evidence that working from home makes us more productive, which is an argument furthered by Labour and the left, the evidence is really lacking. And what studies they have done, I think, fall prey to the Hawthorne effect, which is where it's in workers' best interest to change their behaviour while the trial is underway or a pilot is underway, because they want to work from home more. And actually, they are more productive during the trial period in order that they can perhaps get a better arrangement for themselves. And then actually, after the trial ends, they revert to being perhaps less productive if they're working from home. So I don't think that we can take too much from that. And really, Mike, what you need is voluntary arrangements that suit both the employer and the employee. And I think what happened during the pandemic was we had this blurring of the lines between work and life. People felt that they had more control over when and where they work. They had more flexibility, and they want to sustain that. And that's all very well if they can be more productive from home.
Yeah, but they're not, are they? Everybody knows they're not.
No, but I think if they were, then compulsion wouldn't be needed. You wouldn't need the government to come in and say, well, we're going to legislate for this because businesses aren't doing it voluntarily. But they would be doing it voluntarily if it were mutually beneficial. And if there are costs to the businesses, then ultimately they will be passed on somehow. They'll be passed on to the workers in the form of lower wages or perhaps fewer job opportunities, promotion opportunities, or they'll be passed on to the consumer in the form of higher prices on the shelves for their services. So I think Labour seems to have a very sort of singular focus, which is how can we get a better deal for workers, in particular public sector workers, and they're not thinking that there are costs to all of this and the cost must be borne somewhere.
Well, we all know now what they meant by working people. They meant people in a trade union, which they should have said, as opposed to, the people that Keir Starmer referred to as making sort of, a very small amount of money and who didn't have any savings. They never did define it. But obviously, if you're in the public sector, you're better off under Labour, no question. Annabel, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Annabel Denham, Deputy Comment Editor from The Telegraph there.